Hello and welcome back to Indistinct Chatter. I'm Eliza, and as always, I am so happy you're here. We are on episode 25. I set a goal for myself to do this for an entire year, and we are almost to the halfway point. So, thank you for being here and listening to my silly little show. It truly makes me so happy and all mushy gushy inside. So, whether you've been listening since episode 1 or you just found this today, hi, welcome. Grab a snack, get comfy. Today's episode is a fun one. I've had a few not so lighthearted episodes lately. So today, I'm not going to focus on heavy political stuff, no doom, none of that whole here's what you need to do to save something. We did that last week with the US Forest Service, which, if you haven't listened to that one yet, do please listen because it does still matter. But this week, we get to just be curious little kittens and I don't know. I mean, we might be a little bit disturbed, but mostly entertained because today we are talking about everyday things that you have probably used your entire life. Things that are likely sitting in your bathroom cabinet, maybe in your garage, maybe under your kitchen sink. Things that were invented for something completely different from what they're being used for today. I promise that by the end of this episode, you will never look at Listerine the same way, or Lysol, or a chainsaw, or honestly, a dentist. And actually, this is kind of why I wanted to do a podcast in the first place. I love learning random facts. I even wanted to have a podcast centered around the origins of the word podcast, which, little fun fact, it has agricultural roots, sort of. But before we dive in today, the news, because this week had a lot going on. I mean, every week does. And there are a couple things that I really wanted to make sure that you knew about or that we just broke down a little bit. So, starting off, let's start with the big one that dropped literally yesterday. If you're an Apple girly, this one's for you. Tim Cook is stepping down as CEO of Apple. As of September 1st of this year, he's out. Sayonara. I mean, not really, not totally out. He is staying as an executive chairman of the board, which is just a fancy way of saying that he gets to have opinions without the whole day-to-day headaches, which is honestly a dream role, so good on him. He's handing things off to John Ternus, who has been Apple's head of hardware engineering. So if you haven't heard of that name, Ternus is the guy who has been behind the actual products. Like, he is the BTS guy. He is behind the scenes. The iPhones, the Macs, the Apple Watch for the last 25 years. He's been at Apple basically his entire career. Here's a little context so you understand kind of how significant this is amongst some of the tech geeks online. So, Tim Cook took over from Steve Jobs in 2011. Steve literally died 6 weeks after handing it off. That's what we call a pressure cooker situation. Cook stepped into that, and then under him, Apple went from a $350 billion company, chill, right? To a $4 trillion company. He launched the Apple Watch, AirPods, Apple TV Plus. He turned Apple into something somehow bigger than it actually was. So, the question that everyone's asking right now is whether Ternus can move Apple forward on AI, because Apple's been kind of slow on that, and some chatter online speculate that that's on purpose, but I couldn't really verify if that's like true or not. This year, they basically leaned on Google's AI to power Siri, which is kind of weird, right? Apple has always stood on its own, separate from Google or anything related to like Android or PC. So to hear that they leaned on Google's AI to power their own service is kind of not really on brand. So basically, Ternus is stepping into this CEO role for a company that is historically iconic, but on the AI sector has some catching up to do or needs to offer something in its place if the rumors are true that Apple doesn't really want to add to the AI situation. I mean, Apple has been trying to pretend that they are for the environment for quite a while now, They use it oftentimes as their excuse for why a new phone charger isn't included with a new phone or why you don't get headphones anymore with a new phone. So, all in all, I mean, good luck, John. Moving along, the 2026 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees were announced this week, and it's honestly a pretty solid class. You've got Oasis, Phil Collins as a solo artist, Iron Maiden, Joy Division / New Order, Sade, Luther Vandross, Wu-Tang Clan, and Billy Idol. The ceremony will be on November 14th at the Peacock Theater in LA. However, when I was doing a little bit of digging, I didn't realize that there was I don't know if it's controversy, but a little something about Oasis. When Oasis was first nominated 2 years ago, Liam Gallagher posted on Twitter something like, "The Rock Hall is full of bumbleclarts. I'm washing my hair." I don't I don't even know what a bumbleclart is, but I never want to be called one. Now, he and Noel have made up and they've done their reunion tour. So, I mean, a lot of people are kind of speculating if whether or not that same energy that Liam had before even still holds up today. So we'll see. Also, Sade hasn't released an album since 2010 and hasn't toured since 2011 and still got in, which honestly says something about how timeless that catalog is. So good for her. Now, this next story didn't get nearly the national coverage that I think it deserved, and it's been building for some weeks now. So I did want to flag it. I've seen a couple of short videos on Reels, and actually, although this is centered in Wisconsin, there have been protests here in town around CSU over this for quite a while now. I think I heard about it maybe the beginning of the year. So there's this facility in Blue Mounds, Wisconsin called Ridgeland Farms. They breed beagles specifically for medical research. And beagles are commonly used in research because of their size and their naturally docile temperament, which just makes this so much more sad and heartbreaking. Like, they're just sweet baby angels. They're so trusting, and it's just so sad. But anyway, last month, things finally hit a breaking point. Animal rights activists basically staged a heist, okay? They went in and they physically removed like 30 dogs or so from the facility. And then roughly 27 people were arrested. But instead of that just being the end of it, the protesters were like, "Bitch, we're going back." So, fast forward to this past Saturday, April 18th, about 1,000 activists showed up. They actually moved the protest up a day early to catch law enforcement off guard, but the police were still ready for them. And it kind of turned into a little bit of a war zone. Tear gas, rubber bullets, pepper spray, just the basics for protest control these days. The organizer was arrested within minutes on conspiracy to commit burglary, and in total, 29 people were arrested and hauled off to jail. But here's where it gets, I don't know, messy. No, not messy. Sketchy, honestly. So last fall, Ridgeland Farms had actually agreed to give up its state breeding license by July 1st of this year. And this was part of a deal to avoid being prosecuted for animal mistreatment. And of course, they didn't admit to doing anything wrong, but I don't know, if you didn't think that you did anything wrong, why are you willing to give up that license? It's a little interesting, don't you think? And of course, there's a loophole. There always is for bad people. The loophole allows them to keep the dogs that they have and use them for research under a federal license. So even though they're shutting down the state side of things, those 2,000 beagles, yes, 2,000 precious baby angels, are still stuck there and being used for research. Protests are still going on, and just the other day, there were people in Madison begging the governor to step in. I don't get it. I don't get why we're still testing on animals. Like, I don't understand that. Anyway, someone offered the farm $1 million this weekend just to let the dogs go to shelters. That offer has been met with silence. And I mean, really logistically, I guess I don't know how you save 2,000 dogs. It's just so sad. Moving on, this one hits close to home for a lot of people in the Midwest, or if you have loved ones in the Midwest. Hello, friends and family. This past Friday, April 17th, a massive severe weather outbreak tore through the region. Over 50 million people across a 1,000-mile stretch were in the path of this thing. Wisconsin took the worst of it. The National Weather Service office in La Crosse issued 26 tornado warnings in one day, in one single day. That is the most they have ever issued in one day since that office opened in 1995. That's crazy. That's scary. In Ringgold, Wisconsin, an EF3 tornado came through and damaged/destroyed around 75 homes. People were trapped in their basements. It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. In Lena, Illinois, a tornado hit while kids were still inside the elementary and high schools. Thankfully, nobody died and nobody was seriously injured. Given the scale of what happened, the fact that we are not talking about mass casualties right now is genuinely remarkable. Luckily, people were getting their warnings and were able to take shelter. There were also tornadoes in Minnesota, Missouri, Oklahoma, Illinois. An EF2 touched down in Rochester, Minnesota, just 90 miles south of Minneapolis. Damage everywhere. Cleanup is still going on. And I know that it's tornado season. I know this is not shocking to most people, but this week was something else, okay? Also, with my absolute fascination and deadly fear of tornadoes, I somehow didn't know this, and I just learned this week that EF scale rating isn't necessarily about how big a tornado is. So it's strictly based on the damage that it leaves behind. So, like when you see a tornado, you don't actually know its EF rating yet. It isn't until the damage has been calculated. So, not to scare you for anyone who lives where tornadoes happen, but just for an example, there was a tornado in 2017. It's referred to as a wedge tornado. So this thing reached almost a mile and a half wide. It's not a cute little spout, a mile and a half wide. And it's the widest tornado in Louisiana history. It was only rated an EF1. There was also an EF0 in Australia once that was like 2 and some change miles wide. EF0, huge, but didn't cause extensive damage. Not because they're weak, but because they hit areas where there wasn't a lot of houses or schools or trees. So that's what they're calculating the damage on. Not how big it is, not how fast it is, just how much damage did it leave behind. And that depends on where it hit. So there are also smaller tornadoes with high EF ratings. So they might look less intimidating, but they're still extremely violent. For example, in Ely, Manitoba, Canada, I don't know if I said that correctly, they were hit by an EF5, but that tornado was roughly only 40 to 50 yards wide. However, it lifted an entire well-anchored brick home off its foundation and tossed it into the air. So big tornado, small tornado, they're scary, okay? And you should take warnings seriously. So anyway, all the tornado talk got me thinking. When those sirens went off across the Midwest on Friday, did you ever stop and wonder where that sound actually came from? Like, obviously from the siren, but like who invented it? What was it originally for? Because I never thought about it until I saw a reel on Instagram tell me about it. I grew up in a small rural town, and every day at noon there was this whistle, just a noon whistle throughout the town. Basically, the town is saying, like, hey, it's lunchtime, come on home from the fields. And then on the first Monday, I believe, of every month, maybe just in the summer months, you would hear the same-ish sound, a little bit of a different tone, definitely ran a little bit longer, and it had a different meaning. That was a tornado siren test, and I think there might have been one for fires too, but I can't remember. However, in Colorado, we didn't have those sirens, so When we moved to that little rural town in Wisconsin, there was a tornado drill that began while I was at school. And I cried so much. I was so scared. I thought we were dying. Luckily, it was just a drill. And then eventually I came to love drills because that meant we got out of class. But tornadoes and tornado warnings in general just still scare me so much. And here's what I found while scrolling through reels that inspired today's episode. So, those tornado sirens weren't even actually invented for tornadoes, they were invented for bombs, specifically World War II air raid sirens. That wailing sound that you hear that just kind of like makes your body know that you need to get up and move before your brain even catches up to what's going on. Like, it's automatic almost. You hear it, you get to safety. That was designed to tell civilians that enemy aircraft was incoming to drop bombs on their city. Terrifying. Like tornado bombs, I don't know which one I'd be more afraid of. Britain started using them in 1939 when the Blitz started. The US picked it up during the Cold War, and then the Civil War Defense Act of 1950 made it official policy to install them everywhere because nuclear attack felt very, very real. It wasn't until 1957 when a killer F5 tornado leveled Ruskin Heights, a Kansas City suburb, that anyone even thought to repurpose them for weather. Officials looked at all those air raid sirens just sitting on poles across the Midwest and thought, wait, couldn't we use these for something else? In June 1958 in Wichita, a weather officer couldn't reach his superiors, so he just made the call himself and he flipped the switch. He used a bomb siren effectively to warn people about a tornado, and it worked. By the early 1980s, people had basically forgotten the origin story entirely. They just kind of became tornado sirens or the noon siren in small town Wisconsin. Fascinating, right? And that is kind of the whole theme of today's episode because most of the everyday things around us have a story like that. We use them and we don't really ask, you know, where they came from. We just kind of accept them as part of the backdrop of our lives without ever really stopping and wondering who made them, why were they made, what was the original intention. So that's what we're doing today. Some of these stories are funny, some are sweet, some are a little unhinged. Some might not be even close to what you were expecting. So let's get into these silly, crazy little stories that you can share when you're in an awkward break the ice situation. Okay, first, I need you to think about whether you have Lysol in your house right now. Most of us probably do. Personally, I don't. I hate it. It's also just bad for the environment. Whatever. You know it. Maybe you love it. Maybe you hate it. It's that yellow bottle. And I'll give it this, okay? It does have an iconic spray. Like, I can hear it right now. That I don't know if I did that right. Of course, the smell. Some people love it. I don't. And even if you get a different scent, just all of Lysol smells like Lysol. Lysol showed up in 1889. Yeah, she's been around. It was introduced to fight a cholera epidemic in Germany. It was a powerful germ killer and it genuinely worked. Listen, my hatred for Lysol is personal. I'm not saying it doesn't work. However, the story from here on out does not, in my opinion. In the early 1900s, they started marketing it to doctors as a surgical antiseptic. Again, reasonable, bacteria bad, kill bacteria. Great, great, great. They also sold it as a floor cleaner. Again, makes sense, kills the germs. But then at the same time they're selling it as a floor cleaner and a surgical antiseptic, they're also selling it as a gonorrhea treatment. So you can clean your operating room, mop your floors, and treat an STI with the same bottle. So basically, Lysol was a product that didn't really know what it was, which I can relate to. I don't always know who I am. But here is where it gets a little dark, okay? And I know I promised lightheartedness, but sometimes the dark is part of the light, okay? In the 1920s, birth control was illegal in the United States. You couldn't advertise it, distribute information about it, none of that. Basically, it was the time of just keep your legs closed. So, what did Lysol do? they saw a gap in the market. They started appearing in women's magazines as a feminine hygiene product, which was a coded term, a euphemism, really. What they were actually pushing was Lysol as birth control. So, could we say Lysol was an early feminist? Eh, we'll see. The ads are something else. They ran dramatic little narratives about marriages falling apart. One of the ads said, "A man marries a woman because he loves her. So instead of blaming him if married love begins to cool, she should question herself." And then it told her to douche with Lysol. Another one literally said, "Sue was furious at Tom for the way he had been treating her, but she was really to blame. She was to blame for his behavior because she didn't use enough Lysol on her nether regions." Now, this should go without saying, but this is obviously very terrifying from a health standpoint, not just a value standpoint. The Lysol formula at the time contained a compound called cresol, which is a coal distillate. In high concentrations, it caused severe chemical burns. By 1911, doctors had already recorded 193 Lysol poisonings and 5 deaths from internal use. Meanwhile, Lysol's ads were calling the product gentle and non-caustic the entire time. And then they didn't even change the formula until 1952. Lysol was the most popular form of birth control in America from the 1930s through the 1960s when the pill was finally approved. Because women had no legal alternative and no legal access to information about their options, douching with a household disinfectant was what the market offered them. So, when you go under your sink to disinfect your counters later today, just think about it, okay? Just think. That used to go up a vagine. Now, let's focus on the bathroom because Listerine has a whole arc and I'm going to take us on that journey, okay? Once again, hate to be a hater, but Listerine burns. I hate Listerine. I am an act girl, okay? It's cheap. It tastes fine. It doesn't burn my mouth. And say what you will about mouthwash, but I stopped using it for a while because TikTok told me it was bad for you. And surprise, surprise, got a cavity. Started using it again. No more cavities. At least not that I know of anyway. I don't have health insurance right now. I digress. Listerine was created in 1879 by a chemist named Dr. Joseph Lawrence. And he was named after Joseph Lister, who was basically the father of antiseptic surgery. You know, the guy who figured out that you should probably kill the germs before you cut someone open. So Listerine starts as a surgical antiseptic. Very legitimate, reasonable, all good. And then it starts going through an identity crisis, which we've all been there. I'm there right now. At various points in its early life, Listerine was marketed as a floor cleaner, a dandruff treatment, a cure for gonorrhea, a remedy for smallpox, a cold medicine, an additive to cigarettes to make them more refreshing, which I just find so funny, a deodorant, and a hair tonic. It was whatever you needed it to be. I remember using it to kill pimples in middle school, like to just dry them up. Did it work? No. Did I continue putting toothpaste and mouthwash on my face and my skin kept getting drier and drier? Yes. But here's the pivot that changed everything. And honestly, it's kind of a masterclass in manipulation. It was the 1920s. Listerine was not doing great. Nobody was buying it. The company was struggling. So Gerald Lambert, the owner's son, came in and decided they needed a new strategy. He found this old, obscure medical term, halitosis, which just means bad breath. It had been around as a clinical word, but nobody was really using it in everyday conversation. Bad breath was just kind of a thing that people had. It wasn't considered a crisis. It wasn't a condition. It was just, morning breath. So Listerine invented the problem. They ran ads with photos of sad, lonely people, young men and women who couldn't find love, couldn't keep their marriages, couldn't get promoted, couldn't even make friends. And the reason for all their suffering? Halitosis. Their bad breath was ruining their lives and they didn't even know it. One ad showed a woman asking herself, "Can I be happy with him in spite of that?" like in spite of his bad breath. In 7 years, so between 1921 and 1927, Listerine's revenue went from $115,000 to over $8 million. They didn't change the formula. They simply just changed the story around the product. An advertising scholar named James Twitchell wrote about this and said Listerine did not make mouthwash as much as it made halitosis. So think about that. I'm not saying they're right for what they did, but I mean, it's kind of iconic, kind of genius. They didn't solve a problem that existed. They created a problem and then sold you the solution. And now we gargle every morning because a company in the 1920s was broke and desperate. So next time you're being influenced by something that makes you suddenly realize that you have a problem, think to yourself, do I? Do I actually have a problem that needs this fix? Or is the company just desperate for my money? And moving on, I want you to think about like the manliest tool in a shed. Like when you think of a typical patriarchal man, like a lumberjack, what tool is in his garage? Maybe it's something that's been used in an iconic horror film. And I'm not talking about hammers or even axes. I'm talking about chainsaws. So the manliest, scariest tool is actually for the girlies because they were invented for childbirth. Yep, that's right. hmm Chainsaws for childbirth. Women really do get put through some shit. So before C-sections were safe, and they genuinely were not safe for a very, very long time, there was no real anesthesia, no antiseptics, and infection killed people routinely. So when a baby got stuck during labor and couldn't be delivered vaginally, doctors had very few options. One of the procedures they used was called, and I'm going to butcher this, a symphysiotomy. I will spare you most of the clinical details, but it involved cutting through the cartilage connecting the pelvic bones to create more room. And they were doing this by hand with small knives, which was obviously very slow, and it made everything a million times more painful and more dangerous, not just for the mother, but also the baby. So in 1785, two Scottish doctors named John Aitken and James Jeffrey looked at this problem and thought there has to be a faster way, right? So they invented a small hand-cranked saw with a chain of tiny serrated links, about the size of a butter knife or so, and you would use it to cut through bone and cartilage more quickly and more precisely than a knife ever could. So, talk about a medical breakthrough. And these doctors were not being cruel. It sounds like torture, but they were trying to help. They were trying to save lives in a world that had basically no other tools. And the chainsaw made a dangerous procedure faster and more survivable for both the mother and the baby. But then C-sections got safer, anesthesia improved, antiseptic practices spread, and the procedure just kind of fell out of favor. So the chainsaw got adapted. They made it bigger, mechanized it. The timber industry picked it up in the early 1900s, and by 1920, it pretty much looked like what we recognize it to be today. And somewhere along that transition, the origin story just kind of fell into the background, into the shadows, kind of forgotten about. So the next time that someone's doing a chainsaw art at a fair or a horror movie comes on, you now have a fun little fact in your back pocket. And that fun little fact is that that thing, that big manly machine thing, was actually invented for one of the most intimate and vulnerable moments a human body can experience. Chainsaws were literally made for the girls. Okay, so moving on. This one is less disturbing. It's more of a happy accident, and I think it's kind of a cute story. So, Rogaine, the stuff that you put on your scalp to try to grow your hair back, that started as a blood pressure medication. In the 1950s, a pharmaceutical company called Upjohn was developing a drug called minoxidil, and that was to treat hypertension, meaning dangerously high blood pressure. They ran clinical trials through the 1970s, and it worked pretty well for what it was designed to do. But the patients started coming back with a side effect. They were growing hair everywhere: face, arms, back, scalp. The clinical term for it was hypertrichosis, which is basically just medical speak for too much hair. When word got out that this blood pressure pill was causing hair growth in 60 to 80% of patients who took it, Upjohn's headquarters was flooded with volunteers for hair loss trials. Like, truly flooded. People were calling in asking to be test subjects, which tells you everything that you need to know about how much people do not want to lose their hair. Hair is sacred. There was actually a decade-long legal fight over who got credit for discovering the hair growth side effect. A dermatology resident named Ginter Khan had been the first to notice and document it, and he and Upjohn both filed patents. They eventually settled, and both names ended up on the patent. So the FDA approved Rogaine for hair loss in 1988. This was the first drug ever specifically approved for baldness. And my little fun fact within a fun fact, they tried to name it Regain, as in regain your hair. For some reason, the FDA rejected that name, so it became Rogaine, which means essentially nothing. It just kind of sounds like it should mean something, but doesn't. The blood pressure medication is still around today, by the way. Minoxidil is still prescribed for resistant hypertension. It just accidentally grew a second career along the way. So talk about diversifying your skills, right? And this next one is a little palate cleanser, a little sweet treat, if you will, because the twist for this one is that the original purpose is actually still the purpose. It just doesn't really feel that way anymore. So in the 1930s, Frank Mars, the founder of Mars Candy Company, was watching British soldiers during the Spanish Civil War. They were eating these little chocolate pellets with a hard sugar shell. And the shell existed for one specific reason. It was so the chocolate wouldn't melt in the field. Talk about logistics. Talk about solution. You can't exactly be handing out melted chocolate to the troops, can you? Mars took that idea. He partnered with Bruce Murray, whose father ran Hershey, and together created M&Ms in 1941. During World War II, they were sold exclusively to the U.S. military. Perfect field candy. Chocolate that survives the heat. The slogan they eventually used, which, contrary to popular belief, was not coined by 50 Cent, melts in your mouth, not in your hand, wasn't just clever marketing. It was literally the military specification they were built to meet. After the war, they went to the general public, and now they're in every movie theater and Halloween bowl in the country. But they're still doing exactly what they were designed to do. The candy shell is still preventing the chocolate from melting in your hand, same as when soldiers were carrying them in their pockets in 1944. Unless you're holding them too long and your hands are really hot, sorry, but it's true. My hands have been stained with color from M&Ms before. Also, I've definitely melted a bag or two in a hot car. But the moral of M&Ms is that sometimes a thing just works and it keeps working. And now you've made it to the last one. And this one is going to sound like a total conspiracy, which I love, but this actually isn't a conspiracy. It is a little unhinged, though. And I think it's good commentary on capitalism and also a reason why other conspiracies about healthcare exist. So, I'm just going to come right out and say it, okay? Cotton candy was invented by a dentist. His name was Dr. William Morrison, Nashville, Tennessee, 1897. And this guy, look, I can't argue. The man had range. He was a dentist, a lawyer, a children's book author, and he helped build the city's water purification system. So, busy guy. But in his spare time, which I don't even know where he got spare time, but he had it, and he teams up with this candy maker named John C. Wharton to build an electric machine that spins heated sugar through tiny holes to create those gossamer threads that we know today as cotton candy. They originally called it fairy floss, which, now that I know how it came to be, is absolutely the correct name for it, in my opinion. You've got tooth fairy, fairy floss. Can you see the conspiracy threads here? Can you see the trap? So they take this fairy floss to the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis and sold almost 69,000 boxes at 25 cents each. Now, back then, 25 cents per box, that's not cheap. They made an equivalent of over $400,000 in today's money, all from spun air and sugar. And I mean, I get it. I paid $12 for a cotton candy cow at a pumpkin patch, but it gets deeper, okay? The conspiracy angle doesn't stop there. And remember, it's not a conspiracy, it just sounds like one. So in 1921, Morrison's patent expires, and who steps in to take over the business? Another dentist, Dr. Joseph Lasco from Louisiana. He makes his own version and rebrands it as cotton candy because it reminds him of the cotton fields around him, and the name just stuck, obviously. So, just to recap, this is not a conspiracy. It just sounds like a conspiracy. The product was invented by dentist number one. The name was coined by dentist number two. And it's honestly just the longest con in the history of American snacking. They literally invented the thing that gives you cavities and then charge you to fix them. Genius. Evil, but genius. But to be fair to the dental community, because I do actually enjoy going to the dentist, a serving of cotton candy the size of your head, like the cow I got at the pumpkin patch, actually has less sugar than a can of Coke. And I mean, it's mostly air, so yeah, duh, but still. And that is where I leave you today, folks. That's the end of the episode. Again, I'm so grateful that anyone listens. I'm especially grateful for those of you who continue to listen, even if I talk about something depressing or unhinged. Also, I'd just like to say if anything jumped out at you today, maybe it sparked you to look into something, please share this episode. Send it to whoever in your life will find the Lysol thing interesting. Maybe they're going to freak out about the chainsaw thing or the dentist thing. And if you haven't left a rating or review yet, please consider it. It takes about 30 seconds, $0, but it makes a huge, huge difference for a small podcast like mine. Also, please come find me on Instagram at indistinct.pod or at Eliza Hollister. I would love to know if any topics have jumped out to you. I would also love if you send me topic ideas. I want to know what you want to hear about, and I would love to talk about it. Send me questions, send me feedback. Feel free to tell me if I'm wrong about something. I'll make a correction in a future episode. I want to hear it all. Until then, we will chat next week. Love ya. Love you. Bye.